Today on the Pitchbook podcast, we have bobsledder and author Jeremy Holm as a relief pitcher pitching his 5 books that he has written. Batter up! The podcast, we're excited to have you on. You are an author and are a bobsledder. We've got to get into the author stuff. We're really excited to have an author on. But tell us a little bit about your bobsledding career. How in the world did you get into this? Like, how do you think, you know what, I just want to go at a really fast speed and scare myself to death. Like, how did this come out as pick for a sport?
So to segue into that, you know what I was doing before bobsledding was actually drag racing. So the speed aspect
It's all
goes
about speed.
right back
Got
and
it.
forth.
I am speed.
Yeah, right. So my dad's company ended up sponsoring the US Olympic bobsled team. This was back right before the 1998 Nagano, Japan Olympics. So the track here in Park City, Utah was completed. So because of that sponsorship, they said, why don't you come, take a bobsled ride? And so it's for 2 people. And my mom, of course, said no right away. So I remember, I'm in high school at this point, right? So I'm in doing homework. I was using my dad's office and using the computer. He walks in and he's just like, "Do you want to go bobsledding?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, whatever," and keep on working. And then the teenage brain caught up because, you answer first, think later. So he leaves the room and I'm sitting there working whatever I'm working on. And then I was like, wait, what did I just agree to? So really cool experience. We get up there, and again, this is before the track was like ready for the 2002 Olympics here in Utah. So it was just the track. Like there were no outbuildings, there was no covers over the track, anything like that. So we get up there and, the snow is like, it's like piled on the side of the track, like 3 or 4 feet up. So all you can see of the start ramp is like this little tunnel, and then it turns and that's all you see. So, they give us a couple seconds of instruction, like sit here, hold here, don't die, and it's funny because a couple years after I took this ride, I actually went back and looked at the copy of the waiver that we signed. And there's a section that says, if you die, you will not sue this facility. All right. Because that's the first thing you think of. But, I sat number 3. My dad sat number 2. We had a driver and a brakeman. And, they walked us off the start. Down we went. And the thing about bobsled is like, depending on the track, the start like that is soft and easy, and you're like, this isn't so bad, this is kind of fun. And then you start picking up speed, and then in turn 4 in Park City you really feel the G forces. So I did what they told us not to do. Like my dad's peaking one way and I'm peaking the other, and then you hit the G forces and all of a sudden your head is 4 times what it's normally supposed to weigh. So we're both just like and it was just awesome after that. Like it was just, it's a blur, it's adrenaline producing, it's like, I really don't know how to describe it. So I got out at the bottom, and I had played soccer for a lot of my life in addition to drag racing. But my mom is down there at the finish line and she's like, "What'd you think?" And I'm like, "Forget soccer. Like this is
It's over.
Yeah, yeah. So that was like, I'm trying to remember. It was like 3 weeks after that, they had a like an end of the first season youth race, and I really had no idea what I was doing, but I listened to a couple of the other athletes from the national team that were there just watching the race, and I ended up winning that race, and that really just cemented it. And I was like, I want to do this. Like this is a really cool sport that nobody in the world gets to do. So if I can do this, I'm going to do it.
Cool. So what was your experience? Where you? Yeah, I think you worked out with the Olympic team. Tell us a little bit more about your experience with.
Yeah. So I went on and gosh, let's see, driving wise, because I was a driver, so I drove 2 and 4-man bobsled, and I did, lots of little races here and there, and then Western regionals and the Nationals, America's Cup, stuff like that. Then I got asked to coach the U.S. adaptive bobsled team, which it was kind of an experimental group. It was to see if we could take like we're all what would be considered able-bodied, right? And so it would be taking what able-bodied athletes can do in bobsled and then transferring it over to, I mean, we had drivers in wheelchairs, we had brakemen that had prosthetics, hip down, knee down, One of my brakemen actually lost his hand in a wakeboarding accident. So it was this big experiment to try this, one of the craziest sports in the Olympics, to see if we can make it safe for the Paralympics. And, I got to hand it to every one of those athletes I worked with, just, how courageous they were to try to just pioneer, to just,
Yeah.
because I would stand up there at the start and I'd have to look at each athlete's prosthetic and the way they ran with that prosthetic, and then coach each one differently on how they were going to push and jump in.
Uh-huh.
But like when you watch, when you watch somebody get out of a wheelchair and like slide themselves onto the nose of the bobsled and then slide themselves in, and we had to use 6-point harnesses for them just in case they went over, they wouldn't fall out. But they harness themselves in, and then they drive down the track at full speed and then get themselves out of the bobsled and then back in a wheelchair and then go right back to the top to do it again. Like it really changes your mindset of like, wow, what limitations have I put on myself in my life?
Yeah, because
And what can I
gravity
do?
doesn't care. Gravity's gonna take you down that thing,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah. And that's like one of the top questions. It's like, have you crashed? And like we've all crashed, like it happens. So gravity like is your friend when you're right side up, but when you're upside down, like so like when you go through a turn, it's like a roller coaster. When you drop down and then you hit that turn at the bottom and you get
yeah.
smashed, that's bobsled. I mean, that's what it feels like in the major
Mhm.
G-force turns. So when you turn over, those G-forces are now trying to suck you into the ice.
Mhm.
So yeah, so gravity doesn't care. It's either
Yep.
your friend or your foe. It's all how you use it.
What are the top speeds on a bobsled? Like how fast are you hitting
Or
like
the
on a
G, yeah, and the G
straightaway
forces. What are what
or
G forces are you hitting?
G-force? Yeah.
Yeah, so average G-forces, like if we're looking at all the tracks in the world, because they're all different, like
Sure.
different turn combination drops, all sorts of things. You're looking at about 5. You could say average is about 5. They've gotten up to pretty close to 6 actually in a format and a couple turns. The top speed just all across the board is 97 point, I think it's 65. And that was like that's not average, that's not normal. Like
Sure.
you can go to other tracks that are slower but a little bit more technical. But yeah, when you're getting into those speeds, like you gotta stay in your A game, because
Oh,
you don't have a lot of time to, like, when you're roaring into a turn. As a driver, you're mentally thinking of where I want to go, where I want to steer. And it's not, you don't have a lot of time to physically make that happen. So a lot of times when you see crashes on TV, it's the driver trying to hold on to the end of the turn just a little long to get a whip out to go a little faster. So it's not that they're making a mistake, it's just at those speeds, just pushing the boundary just a little bit, and
yeah.
sometimes it's too far.
Well, if you're off by a 16th of an inch, you're off the track, right? I mean, like if you're just riding that edge,
Yeah, I mean, like
just
I mean, almost never, 99.9% of the time, you'll never like come out of the track, but you'll roll over and you'll stay in. And we did have one crash a couple years ago where the sled ejected, but they're designed, the turns are designed to keep you in. So if you
right.
lose control, you can hit hard, and you can, be upside down. And especially 4-man, when you're packed in so tight, you don't have a lot of space to really get in the sled. So we wear like these burn suits underneath our spandex uniforms, because spandex is really protective. It's great, by the way. But the burn suits help. Like it just dissipates the heat. So see, this is all the stuff you don't get from Cool Runnings. They don't teach
No,
you any of
exactly.
this stuff. So it is not a good bobsled 101.
I was just thinking going 30, 35 miles an hour in my four-wheeler, that feels like you're going 100. So I can only imagine sitting in a bobsled going almost 100 miles an hour. The reflexes have to be just so insanely good to be able to.
Yeah. Well, so you can tell drivers, like if you ever go up to a track and you go up to the start area, you can tell who the drivers are, because they're up there. Like we'll close our eyes, we'll put our hands out like we're driving, like this, and then we'll drive the track in our minds just to be prepared for it. And it's kind of weird to when I explain it to people, like when you're driving on the track, your brain is almost split into two parts. Like one part is analyzing where you are, like what's the G forces, how high am I in the turn, how fast are we moving, what's the angle of the sled. It's computing all that. And then the other part is thinking, I need to get to that point to come out at this angle to get into that turn over there. And it's weird. Like, even when I think about it, like, it's weird how your brain can do that. And the human brain is amazing, but it's not like those two parts are competing with each other. They're just working. So I got to the point where I could go through a turn and I could pick my family out of the crowd. Because you're going down at full speed, but I don't know. Like, I had a friend who,
you're in the zone.
You really are in the zone. Like, it's like, baseball, how does a batter hit almost 100-mile-an-hour fastball? It's just so much practice. And I was talking to a girl who was training for the women's softball team back when we had softball in the Olympics. And she said during some of the practices, the pitcher would pitch the ball, but the thread was different on all the different balls, and they'd have to shout what color they were seeing before they could swing. So you think of being able to slow that down that much, your brain learns to process at those speeds. And I don't know, it's pretty incredible. Like, human body's awesome.
It really is.
So I have a weird question. The brake person makes sense. The driver makes sense. What do the two people in the middle do? Is their job just to push it fast at the beginning? Is that it? I mean, other than that, I mean, are they leaning are they messing things up? Can they mess things up?
No, I mean, like, so think of like aerodynamics, right? Like, you want to have all your helmets like in line, because if you have one over here and one over here, I mean, it's not like a ton of drag, but it's a little bit. So the whole idea is, at the start, like, the joke was they're there to just be horses, push fast and jump in and stuff like that. But you can win or lose the race right there in the push. So, you said you like football. We actually do get a lot of football players, a lot of ex-college athletes, just because they have that explosive power. But if you think about being able to explode off the line and then push, if you're lineman, whatever, or, we did get a lot of receivers just for the speed and so forth. But, if you get a football player who's very accustomed to exploding and then shoving, that's bobsled right there at the start. So it's when I say you can lose the race at the start, it's because, let's say the three of us are different teams, and, Matt, let's say that your team drives 1/10 faster, or your start time is 1/10 faster than mine is. If you and I drive the same sled, same weight, everything, you'll generally 3/10 beat me at the bottom. Does that make sense? So that's why the start is really
a huge advantage if you're faster at the start, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So we look for speed and power.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get to the reason you're here, because you are an author, and we're curious what it takes to write books. I'm sure that Zach is going to come up with some amazing book at some point, and I will read it and then pitch it on this podcast, because I'm not a writer. But tell us about you've got a couple books about bobsledding, and then some books about World War II, which sound really interesting. Let's chat about the bobsled books really quick. Tell us what they are, and kind of give us an idea or flavor of what those are about.
Absolutely. So I've always loved reading. So, I mean, that's my pitch out there for everybody listening to this, is like, there's power in books. I mean, just so much knowledge to be gained and so forth. So I would actually just read books before I would go drive. That was just my way of kind of getting in the zone, kind of, calming it down. As a driver, like we mentioned, reflexes, your mind has to be pretty clear. You push like an animal at the start, jump in, drive like a fighter pilot. So I kind of thought, I still do a lot of school visits, a lot of work with youth groups. And I thought, what if I took the things I've learned and then shared it with youth? And then I also thought, well, I speak at a lot of businesses all across the country doing leadership, teamwork, goal setting, conflict resolution, communication, whatever, and thought, well, why don't I just try to nutshell some of these things that I've learned? So the first book is called The Champion's Way. And it's based on 12 winning principles for a gold medal life. And it takes some of those lessons I learned on the ice and then learned from training alongside these gold medalists and world champions, and just what really can make us successful in whatever course we're pursuing. Just kind of give you an idea for it. So one of the chapters is on second chances. It's interesting because bobsled, the way races work is you get 2 heats per day, and then sometimes it's 2 days. So you have those 4 heats, right? But I have seen, teams that their first run, maybe the driver made a mistake. I've done it where you make a mistake and it's very easy to think like, wow, it's over, right? Like the game is over. Should I really try again? Should I really get back out there?
Do they take the
And
best time, or do they do cumulative? How does it work?
it's cumulative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just whoever has the
Got it.
fastest times combined and so
Got it.
forth.
Got it.
Yeah. But the thing is, like you can come back and you can have an amazing second run, and you can make up that time. Like it is hard to do, to be honest, but it can be done. So I kind of thought about that in life. Like we've all got goals and we've all got dreams, and even as we get older, we think like, wow, I'm at this point, and you know made mistakes or whatever it might be, and
Jeremy, you just disappeared, and we now have a. Oh, there we go. You're back.
we back.
We're
Okay.
back.
Yep.
Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
We heard you, but there was a weird, like 1980s TV screen. It's all good now, though. Okay, so
It's
sorry.
okay. I should have a theme song from the 80s or something. So the other
So
thing
we can
is,
all come back. So sorry, you were saying, we might make mistakes. We have goals, and we can all come back. Maybe the second heat we do better. Is that kind of the gist?
yeah, absolutely. So that's just one of the principles I talk about, is just like second chances, because it's just, there was a time that like I wrecked like hardcore during a World Cup race and everything, and like damaged the sled and all this stuff. And I remember just thinking like, oh, this is bad, right? Like sled was damaged. Like I said, I couldn't fix it. And I remember thinking like, wow, are we going to be able to get back on the ice quickly? You have all those thoughts as a driver, like it's my fault. I made this mistake. You have that riding on
Pressure.
you. And,
Yep.
I remember my team just rallied around me, and they're just like, dude, we're going to fix this. We're going to get back out there. So I think that, as a winning principle, it's not a straight line from I'm starting to my goal from here to there. It's I'm going to fall along the way. I'm going to make mistakes. It's going to be messy, but if I get back up and keep going, that's what matters. So yeah, so just the champion's way. It's just I'm actually working on revamping this one right now.
Cool.
Yeah. So there's that one. So the second book, um, I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But I had a lot of spiritual, like personally spiritual experiences on the ice. I think everyone's coming from different places. Maybe they have different beliefs, but I feel like God found me on the bobsled track, which it sounds weird saying that, but it is true. So I wrote this book called Fire on Ice, and I took all the experiences, lessons learned, good and bad, from being a driver, being a coach, being an athlete, working with my coaches, working for sponsorships, all these experiences that I had, and just applied it to gospel principles and so forth. So that was really cool for me personally to write, but it's been really neat to see how it's been received around the world, to just kind of tie those two worlds together.
Yeah. So this would be more if you're interested in some a little bit more of a religious or spiritual type of book, but yet you got the bobsled lessons and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I had somebody ask me, they asked me one time, they're like, how do you compare the Olympics to Christianity? And I'm like, well, there's interesting similarities, but there's lessons to be learned and ways to strengthen faith in this world. Cool. So yeah, so that's Fire on Ice. So those are my two bobsled books, and just, yeah, they were just aghast to write both of them. So it is cool to hear from readers.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? When you're writing, what does that process look like? Do you just have kind of the chapters in your mind, and you just, or is it like kind of a forced march where you're making yourself write those principles down? I mean,
yeah,
maybe it's different from book to book. I don't know.
A little bit, but yeah. So I generally have like ideas, and I'll mentally kind of start a structure in my head, and then I'll usually like, it's kind of like we did in like school, right? Remember when they had you sit down and start doing your outline of main themes and stuff? And so I'll kind of start with that. And like when I first started, I wrote my first two books in Word, like Microsoft Word. And And that was kind of messy because, it's not like you can set up chapters in a way. But these other 3 books that we'll talk about, I started using InDesign. And so what I would do is I would kind of write what was on my mind or what I was feeling the most at that moment. And so I would kind of jump to that chapter and tell that story and flesh out the ideas and so forth. So it wasn't like a straight page 1 to the last page. I would just go with what I was thinking about, what had hit my heart the most at the moment for these books. And I would go back and forth and I'd move things around. And so that's why I say it's messy. Like it's okay to make it messy. Like it's okay to cut here and paste here and think, oh, that doesn't work, move here. And so I get people asking all the time, like, how do you write a book? And I just say it starts with an idea, and it starts with the first sentence, and then it just goes to the second sentence, and it just goes from there. Like it's not, we get overwhelmed by the massive end result we're thinking about, but the whole process is just one word at a time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So seriously,
like your
Zach,
goals,
like,
right?
Yeah, right. Like, so Zach, if you're thinking about writing a book, like honestly, like
I'm not thinking about it at all.
Okay.
He's going to. Don't let him fool you.
But maybe some of your listeners are, and that would just be
exactly.
Yeah. And that's what I say, like, somebody has to publish the next book. Why not you, right? Like, why not the person who wants to publish a book? And I just say, like, if you have that dream, if you don't start on it, it's never going to happen. But if you start on it and keep honing your craft, you can make this happen. So yeah, that's
awesome.
Okay, so please tell me, this is in my mind, I'm hoping this happened. I'm hoping that you had in your mind, you're like, I gotta come up with 13 principles. And then you write and you're like, oh man, I just can't do it. Only we're gonna have to do 12.
Right. You do 13 awesome. And people are like, oh, that seems like an unlucky book. 13. I don't know about that. So
yeah. This principle is really important, but we're cutting it because people won't buy the book.
Yeah. Well, it was, so and that's the thing about Fire on Ice is I'm able to do like more because it's definitely a bigger book. But Champions Way was just a little more streamlined.
Yeah, I'm just joking.
And I've spoken to like Fortune 500 companies, and they want to buy, like 500, 1,000 copies. They know their employees want a quick read and stuff like that.
Yeah, so, for sure. Tell us, so the last 3 books are totally different. Tell us tell us about them and how you got involved writing those, and also what this seems like it would be a different process than the first 2, right? So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, totally different process. I mean, like the first 2 are a little autobiographical in a way, so it's easy. I'm telling my story. So my grandfather was a paratrooper in World War II, and he was just my hero. Like he was the best grandfather you could ask for, and he was actually very supportive of bobsled. He came up several times when they came to Utah, and I showed him, and he thought it was so great. He and my grandma actually donated to the Olympic Committee, partially because they're thinking this is supporting our grandson. This money will go to him, which, I mean, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, that's cool.
Probably got a couple cents. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, like after they take their administrative costs out,
Yeah.
But as I got older, we're talking early 20s, mid 20s and so forth. And into about 30, we just started talking more about World War II. I grew up we'd go visit him, and he had some pictures on the wall. He had a commemorative service pistol on the wall, jump wings, all these different things. And as a kid, you see it, but you don't think anything. So as he and I talked about the war, I realized, what a hero my grandfather was. And, that just elevated him in my eyes even more, and he said something once. He said, most people don't know what we did in the war, because he was in the 11th Airborne Division, which fought in the Pacific Theater. So most people know Normandy, D-Day. They know Italy, North Africa, Battle of the Bulge, so forth. So they know.
And then it's Hiroshima. Then we only hear about Hiroshima.
Right, exactly, right? Like, well, and the other funny thing they said, like, everybody thinks that only Marines fought in the Pacific Theater, which was totally not the case.
Not true. Yeah.
So my grandma said once that, my grandpa had a few World War II books, and she said he doesn't really like them because they never mention his division. I mean, we're talking books that were covering the Pacific Theater,
Mm.
war in the Philippines, and they would maybe have like half a sentence saying the 11th Airborne was here.
Mm.
So I remember him kind of mentioning like it'd be nice if somebody knew our story, and I said, "Well, I'll write your story." And so we
Was that
just
an
talked.
offhanded comment, or you're like,
No,
oh,
it was you know
because
it was
had you
like,
already written your other books? As the
yeah,
question. Okay, so
yeah.
you okay.
So
So
it
you
was kind of like, I don't know, it might have been like slightly cocky, just like I can tell your story, like I can do this, right? But it was more of like a desire to honor my grandfather. And
cool. Yeah.
you know, like my family's very patriotic. My dad's an Air Force veteran, and then I had several veterans on my bobsled team over the years, and then so just deep love for our country. And I thought this would be a great way to honor these heroes. And so my grandma had been interviewing a lot of these veterans over the years before they died. And so she gave me her stories, interviewed grandpa. They put me in touch with the other paratroopers still alive. So that all came together. And so you asked about the process. And this process was very different because it was going through casualty reports and mourning reports and these S2, S3, S4 journals and researching in museum archives, which was a whole new world for me. But it was great. I loved it. So what came about was this book called When Angels Fall. So it's
That's
kind of,
cool.
we call it the Band of Brothers of the Pacific, because if you've read Stephen Ambrose's book Band of Brothers, you know that's, you know, Easy Company, you know, 506 over in Europe. So this focuses on the 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Grandpa's regiment, and follows their history from Camp Toccoa, which is where Easy Company started, but follows them from Camp Toccoa all the way to Tokyo. I mean, these guys fought on Leyte and Luzon. They were General MacArthur's honor guard in Japan. I mean, just a funny story nobody knows about is like they actually guarded the surrender documents that Japan signed on the Missouri and
Oh,
guarded those back to Washington to give to the president.
That's cool.
So, I mean, and it's a hard, it was a hard book to write, because you're getting these very personal stories, you know, interviewing these veterans now in their 90s, and they're tearing up talking about their buddy who was, you know, they were young, they were
Yeah.
17, 18, 19, and they're just talking about the vicious engagements with the Japanese on Leyte and Luzon. I mean, this was jungle fighting and then city
mhm.
fighting and then mountain fighting, and they're just talking about when they tried to save their buddy's life, or when they came back from a patrol and found out that their buddy had been killed in an artillery strike. And you know, it's just, it's, I don't know, it's very easy for a lot of Americans today to forget the price
Yep.
of freedom because we haven't really had to pay it. This generation did. And so it was a complete honor for me to be able to tell their story. And you know, I sent copies of the book when it finally was published, sent it to all the guys I worked with, and some of them, you know, I knew had passed away before publication, and that was hard. But the ones that were still alive would just, you know, they emailed me or texted me or called me and just said thank you, you know, thank you for telling our story. And you know, that to me is worth more than any gold medal I have. It really is.
That's cool. And then,
So
so the other two are continuations, or are they? What are the other two that are
yeah,
in the same vein?
so When Angels Fall is like I said, it's Band of Brothers of the Pacific,
Mhm.
kind of
One
close
group.
quarters, kind of
Got it.
small unit, getting to know these paratroopers more. But you know, I talked to some of the other troopers in the division, right, in the 11th Airborne Division, and just these incredible stories. And as I was researching in the museums, and family members of these troopers who had passed on would send me their letters or copies of journals they had, photographs, and I thought, you know, I really need to expand and tell the whole division story. So that turned into what I called Down from Heaven. So it's Down from Heaven. We have volumes 1 and 2, and I tried to just tell more of the other units' stories as well. Like there is a lot of personal stories in here, and you know, my wife is still working her way through When Angels Fall because she said it's so hard to read about these young kids in this vicious war who are fighting for our freedoms. And so Down from Heaven is the same way. Like it'll you know, you'll ride the roller coaster of emotions with this. um I don't know, it's pretty cool to just not just tell their story, but to know that I was able to make an impact in America's history, military history, World War II history in this way to tell this. And it's cool because the 11th Airborne was reactivated up in Alaska. I think it's 2 years ago now. So
I
these
didn't know
books
that.
came out right before that. And so it's been cool to work with these modern 11th Airborne Angels, that's their nickname, just help them know their history and share it with that. So I get to
That's
do
cool.
World War II through today as well.
It's funny. My grandfather growing up, he was a paratrooper in Italy during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that they called them devils in boots. So the people in Italy, he said they would just run with these packs on, like they had broad shoulders, just strong, hard
Mm-hmm.
charging kids
Yeah.
jumping out of these planes. And I mean, there would just be, dozens and dozens of them. But that was
Mm-hmm.
their nickname, was devils in boots. And I remember him telling me that. So it's interesting. You're calling them angels falling from heaven,
Right. Right.
but to the
Well,
enemy, they're like, we don't want
yeah,
those
no,
guys.
no, no. Yeah.
You
The
don't want them running
Japanese,
at you. They're pretty
right.
hardcore.
It was interesting doing all this research and talking to these old paratroopers because I saw these correlations between their initial selection processes and then training and then bobsled as well, right? Like to give you an example, like, to be a paratrooper, you had to volunteer and then you would have to pass some tests. And then the training really started and it was intense and it was designed to weed out those who couldn't handle it. And bobsled's kind of the same way. Like our training is intense. You have to want to get into it. And then over the years, I've seen athletes come in just like, oh, I'm going to be the best athlete. They took one run down the track and they're like, nope, I'm out. Like, this is not for me. So, and then just like the teamwork that happened, the camaraderie, the loyalty. I don't know, like I'm sure your grandpa's story is amazing. Like, and that's cool because you have a book that he wrote. That's
Well,
awesome.
I was going to show you this picture.
Uh,
There's a little bit of a glare
Glare.
there. I don't know if you can see
yep.
that
I bet
very
his
well.
patch right
That's
there. I
cool.
bet his patch says Camp Toccoa, Georgia on his, actually, he's in the 11th Airborne. Zach, your grandfather was in the unit that I wrote about.
No way.
Look at his shoulder patch. You see how it's got the two white wings on it?
Yeah.
Um, I have one here. Here, look, watch this. See this?
Whoa. All right. I got to read it.
That's awesome. You know what that means, though, right? Number one, I need a copy of his book. But number two, I can probably help you find more about him.
That would be really cool. That
That's
would be
cool.
awesome.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Crazy.
Well, this interview was totally worth it. This was
Totally. Totally. And
But-
he really didn't talk much about his experience in the war.
Mhm.
I'm just trying to imagine, as you're doing these interviews, that generate they are the greatest generation because they went into this huge heroic thing.
Mhm.
Fortunate that they were able to come home, those that did make it home, and then just kind of kept a lot of those experiences inside for so many years. And he was kind of that way. So I don't ever feel like I got to ask him the questions I wanted to ask,
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to dive into your books
Yeah,
on, I guess,
my
the same
guess is
division. Yeah.
right. Well, I mean, if he did go to Italy, there were a lot of guys who started stateside with the 11th Airborne, and then they went over to the 82nd, 101st when they needed replacements. But yeah, a lot of these guys, they would. There were a lot of times these old paratroopers and there were glider troopers in the division as well, and they would say like, "I've never told anybody this story," and they would just tell me the story that just like it one human being to another, like it's almost intimate in a way. They're sharing these visceral personal stories, but a lot of them said like, if I don't tell you, no one will know and it'll be too late. um they knew that they're some of the last living ones. I mean, we only have a handful left from this
Yeah.
division that were World War II combat veterans. And so that made it a little bit easier for them to realize, I do want to tell these stories. It is hard still, all these years later, but I want to honor my buddy or the officer that kept us alive or the non-coms that we respected so much. And that's usually what it came out to be. Was they didn't always want to tell like their stories, but they wanted to honor somebody who they loved and respected as a brother. So it is really cool to be able to tell their stories this way. And so now I devote a lot of my time half and half doing the bobsled lecturing, keynote addresses, and seminars and stuff like that. But the other half is traveling to lecture and do book signings for the 11th Airborne Division, just tell their story, and that's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
Because I spent so much of my time telling my story, but to be able to tell the story of these heroes, yeah, it's a privilege.
That's awesome. Do you have anything on the horizon that that you can give us a little teaser about? Are you working on any books now, or is it a secret? Spill the dirt here.
Yeah, let's do it. So I'm working on volume 3 of Down from Heaven right now. This will cover the Korean War.
Okay.
And then some stateside. But I'm also working on, I have like a list. It's an ongoing list of like 20 books, and I just keep throwing ideas to it. Working on a movie script about the 11th Airborne in World War II. So that's on the burner. I do have a podcast that I do on their history. I have a podcast on self-help, development, leadership, all that stuff. And then as far as another book goes, I had an interesting idea a couple years ago. A friend of mine called me one day and she's like, "Can we do dinner?" So we went to dinner, and she'd been struggling with an eating disorder, like to a scary point. And so I went and I sat down with her and we just talked, and she said, "I don't want to die. I need some help." So I helped her with that process and so forth. But I thought, what if we changed? So I'm trying to figure out how to nutshell this. I thought, what if we change our mindset about people who struggle with addiction to look at them more as like a prisoner of the war who have been captured by an enemy? So I started delving into that and looking at the psychological comparisons, the physiological comparisons, and so I'm actually working on a book like that, just called Prisoners of the War. And it's never to necessarily like take away someone's personal responsibility, but it is maybe to help the rest of us look at it differently and also come at it at a different way, that maybe we can band together like a band of brothers and help someone who's struggling out. So we understand it more, they understand their options, maybe they feel less shame, and then therefore are more open to seek help and so forth. And my other thought with that was like, a lot of us guys, we don't like to ask for help, right? Like if we're struggling, we just hold it in. So I thought, coming at it with a military standpoint, maybe that'll make it a little bit more palatable for guys who are struggling in their lives. Like maybe this can help them, get some help, change some things, and then just have a even more deeply enriching life as they go forward. So all those things are on the horizon. Plus,
okay, well, we're excited to hear about it and go from there. So we're gonna go ahead. Sorry, Zach.
Volume 1 is on its way to my house. I can't wait to dig into.
We're gonna link to all the books on Amazon, and so that people can purchase the books and check them out. I'm excited to do that. Zach, you have a homework assignment of reading your grandpa's book, and then I'm gonna check out Jeremy's books as well. So, yeah, we're really happy to have you on here. Anything else? So you've got the podcast, we've got the books. Anything else? You do some speaking? As you have a website? Anything else we should plug for you? You should plug.
You know what? Like, if honestly, like anybody listening, like I do deeply enjoy definitely school visits. Like Bob said, gets kids' attention, but I do church groups. But it is really fun to come in and do keynote addresses for corporations. But also leadership and teamwork training, goal setting, like just work on one-on-one with people and just take some of those things that most of us have heard in our jobs, but just flip it around and come at it from an Olympic perspective. Actually it's one of the most fun things we get to do is I'll bring an Olympic torch from the Pyeongchang Olympics and, let people hold it and get their pictures, but then kind of share their goals and so forth. So
that's cool.
Yeah. Anybody who's listening to this, please read the books for sure. But if I can help you in your organization in any way, please let me know.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate having you on, Jeremy. It's been an honor, and we're excited to check these out, and we're going to report back on the podcast what we think. So, thanks again for coming on. We really appreciate having everybody listen to the podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out Jeremy's books in the links, and we really appreciate obviously having Deja Vega let us use their music. Thanks everyone for listening to the Pitchbook podcast, and we'll catch you next time.